modern feminisms essentially descend from monolithic feminist approaches. Thank you for switching off your mic. All right. So with that brief introduction, let me talk a little bit about some of these different feminist schools, and with the purpose of thinking about how their insights can be integrated into methodologies. So this is material for theoretical frameworks, and underneath those frameworks, you can develop methodologies, whether qualitative or quantitative, or preferably encompassing elements of both.
So, kindly switch off your mics. I see there's somebody 815. Kindly switch off your mic.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you for that. So there are many feminisms, and I'm going to start with the Western feminisms, and then go to Black feminisms, and then go to African feminism. So that is the thematic approach I'm taking to this. And the primary, the most successful, the most influential school of Western feminism is liberal feminism, that has elements of formal equality, so men and women are equal, and gender neutrality, so rights should be enjoyed, and there should be no discrimination on the basis of gender, and therefore taking the assumption that legal personality does not distinguish between women and men in terms of granting them status, but they all have the same equality of status. Those are its strengths, those are its contributions, those are its basic assumptions. However, one limitation of them is that they give no account of equality of opportunity. So they start as if life is on, you start with a clean slate, everyone is equal, you start at the same level, and then you compete. It's a fair competition, without pointing out actually some people might have certain structural disadvantages that prevent them from fully occupying the type of if you like, constructed legal personality that is propounded by liberal thinking. Okay, and liberal feminism, I mean, John Stuart Mill, Harriet Mill are key thinkers in this, key historical thinkers with this, and which sort of makes the point that everybody knows John Stuart Mill, not everybody knows Harriet Mill, who was his wife. In many ways, she was his co-author, his muse, and probably the source of many of his ideas, but she only gets acknowledged as his wife when maybe chances are she had a lot to do with the actual ideas that Mill himself is famous for. Anyway, so cultural feminism, in this instance, I'm going to speak about, say, Carol Gilligan's approach to this, and her background is psycho analysis, so very different from the background of the other liberal feminists that tended to be political theory and lawyers in terms of the disciplinary background. But Carol Gilligan talks about cultural feminism, which in essence deploys positive stereotypical female characteristics. So it takes for granted that there's male and there's female, and that society needs both male and female to work, and the males and females are different, but complement each other. So they say certain feminine or feminized attributes such as passivity, emotion, not motion, but emotion and connectedness that are stereotypically feminine are just as good as aggression, abstractedness, and individuality. So in this sense, they affirm both masculine and feminine roles in their terms. Let men be men, let women be women, and society will be better and richer as a result. But of course, this harmonious presentation of feminist thinking does not address power relations, even if even if it has room to speak about equality of opportunity. So in a sense, it addresses some of the weaknesses of liberal feminism, but exposes some weaknesses of itself. But in terms of research, methodology based on this framework, it's important to understand that it arose because Carol Gilligan noticed that there are certain subjects in which there are, say, equal numbers or roughly equal numbers of men and women, but the women seem to do much worse in those classes than the men. And these were classes to do with ethical reasoning. And she thought to herself, surely women are not less ethical or less able to reason than men. How come so many women are failing these classes? And when she analyzed the assessments in the class, it was something like this. Essentially, it posed a hypothetical question in which students were supposed to provide a response, and by that response, it could be judged as to whether or not they were ethically minded. And the question was that your child is sick. You don't have any money to buy medicine. You go to the chemist and ask for help to save your child's life, and the chemist says, no. What do you do next? Do you steal the medicine and save your child's life, or do you respect the property rights of the chemist? And the majority of men would respond that this medicine is not yours. It belongs to the chemist. You have no right to take it. You need to respect other people's rights, even if it causes you disadvantage. So the health of your child is not the responsibility of the chemist, and this is his medicine. And if you cannot pay for it, well, too bad. That is just the way it is. And the majority of the women would say, well, but of course, we will take the medicine and save the child, because a child's life is worth more than property rights. And the ethical position would not be to set up this abstract property right against the concrete reality of a child. And the male professor, would mark them wrong and saying that they were ethically stunted and undeveloped because they didn't understand how to act ethically in that situation. You see, so that was the actual sort of concrete area where Carol Gilligan's work arose from. So by almost observing this in a kind of ethnographic or anthropological way, you can see you're able to demonstrate the flaws in the assessment in a way which you can see in terms of liberal feminism. You've admitted men and women equally into education. But having done that, your assessment and your attitudes disadvantage women once they're there. And they disadvantage women for reasons other than their intellectual aptitude, for other reasons completely, just because they see life in a different way. And Gilligan's approach was to say, actually, we need to understand that men and women look at things differently. And what women have to bring to the table is just as valuable as what men have to bring to the table, but without critiquing power relations. Okay, so that's cultural feminism. Whereas radical feminism, Catherine McKinnon is probably the most famous exponent of this school, focuses on power and power relations. And therefore they are dissatisfied, while appreciating the contributions of liberal feminism, they're dissatisfied with the underlying assumptions of liberal society. So basically around formal equality. Okay, and they make the critique that women's oppression is caused by socio-cultural arrangements, which require subjection to men. So in other words, it's not just legal, political, it's also social, cultural. You cannot just change the law and provide equality on paper and expect that society will follow, which is why they say that mere reform of legal and political systems is not the answer. And instead, what it's about the struggle to challenge gendered power, dominance, hierarchy, and competition in socio-cultural institutions, including the family, the church, the academy, the workplace, and so on and so forth. So gendered notions of femininity or of femaleness are the problem from radical feminist perspective. Whereas in cultural feminism, you can see they are the solution. And in liberal feminism, you can see that gender as such is almost invisible. They focus more or less on sex and say sex should not be taken into account in terms of discriminating between men and women. Okay, so they you can see we start from the simple and clear and start going to the more nuanced and, in my view, more sophisticated. Okay. I hope that is more or less clear. I don't see whether there are any questions at all at this moment. All right, so then I'll carry on. So that's first and second generation. Now, third generation is probably best exemplified by postmodern feminism. And postmodern feminism, just like postmodernity itself, is anti-essentialist. It says there's nothing essential to distinguish between women and men. And also, there isn't any monolithic point of view whatsoever from which you can identify any essences between men and women or male and female. So clearly they reject the idea of universality, that there's one point from which you can explain everything, or one point from which you can reform everything. And they actually say that it's actually a form of male thinking to seek one true feminist story of reality. Because for them, the point is that women are not all the same. So you can see that this approach values diversity and individuality of particular situations. And you might well wonder if there's no essential difference between men and women and male and female, how could you have such a thing as feminism, as postmodern feminism? And their response is that there isn't any single monolithic women's point of view, but across cultures, across spaces, across eras, there are certain commonalities that are shared with a broad group that we call women, and that commonality would include the oppression by patriarchal institutions. Okay, so that is what would be at the core. So, but in different ways depending on their specific contexts. So, Black feminism is also, I think, among the third generation of feminist theories, and it is also building upon what has gone on before and repairing some of the, if you like, blind spot and flaws of the other feminist schools, and also making its own unique contribution. So the context where this arises from is different. So, so liberal feminism arises from the struggle for equal rights around, participation in the public sphere, especially, and tied to that in the economy as the realm of business. So women fighting for equality in the market and in the city, if you like. Okay, and then the second generation feminists arose from the context where, yes, we've gotten all of these rights on paper, and no, we don't really enjoy them in real life, and we need to do something about that. Either, have a revolution to get rid of all of these systems, the radical feminist approach, or whether we need to take into account that we actually women with certain attributes, certain feminine attributes that can make a positive contribution, which is the cultural feminist approach. But the Black feminist approach arose in the context, at least this specific aspect, it's in the context of domestic violence. So it's in the context of violence at home, which disproportionately, of course, targets women. And the Black feminists found that the, if you like, the mainstream feminists did not quite capture the lived experience of Black women, because they said Black women suffer from sexism. Yes, it is true, but they also suffer from racism. And where racism and sexism intersect is not addressed in any of the feminist theories at all. So they focus on feminism, they focus on the plight of women, they talk about jobs and income and wealth and what have you, but very rarely do they talk about the situations in which say racism and sexism intersect. So intersectionality is essentially a critique of the scholarship that focuses only on race and of the scholarship that focuses only on sex. To say actually both of these intersect in the lived experience of Black women. So the point that Kimberly Crenshaw makes, very eloquently, is that in real life, racism and sexism intersect, and if you don't recognize that, then it renders the struggle of Black women invisible and not addressed. Okay, which is why I should argue for intersectionality, which is quite, in my view, it's a very nuanced way of approaching these issues, and it centers some of the most, if not the most disadvantaged groups in the context of say the United States, or maybe even the West generally. Whereas African feminism, I know there's a lot of you in the room, if that's what we call a Zoom seminar. There are many, great thinkers, Sylvia Tamale and people like those. But essentially, if using this definition from Amina Mama in the Oxford Research Encyclopedia of African History, she says that African feminist thought refers to the dynamic ideas, reflections, theories, and other expressions of intellectual practices by politically radical African women that are concerned with liberating Africa by focusing on women's liberation. And as such, it cannot be easily defined or captured. But having said that, the conditions out of which Africa's feminist movements form and intellectual labor that they carry out in their pursuit of women's rights and freedoms can be explored and discussed. Yep. And I think that is true. And I think currently that is the space within which we are in, trying to develop African feminist thought in a way that is grounded in the lived realities of African women from all walks of life, where we learn from the major Western feminist approaches, but apply them, but don't apply them directly without clearly thinking through and adapting them to our own reality and our own experiences. In other words, for us to be thought leaders, we would have to lead in thinking as opposed to be led by others. Okay, so the contributions of these different feminist schools are quite clear. So liberal feminism has had the most sort of impact. So we have formal equality, the right to vote, the right to hold public office, the right to participate in professional associations and work, the right to own property, reforms around the custody and guardianship of children, and so on and so forth, best exemplified in the Human Rights Convention, the Convention on the Elimination of Discrimination against women. But having said that, looking at the controversy around the 2/3 gender rule in representation, you can clearly see that even if we've made these rules, even if we have, as it were, embodied them in the highest and most authoritative form of laws that we have, it is still in reality almost impossible to be able to fulfill them, even if they're there on paper. So in fact, liberal feminism is so successful that if you have training in law and you're working competently, you're a liberal feminist. That is just the way it is. Because the way our law is, it means that liberal feminism is baked into the cake, if you like. It is right there. So when the Chief Justice speaks about this 2/3 gender rule, you could say he's just applying black letter law, or you could say he's being a liberal feminist. And both of those are true. Both of those are true. Okay, so the other contribution that feminist thought has made, and this is beyond liberal feminism, is they have used women's lived experience to highlight this public-private divide regarding the legitimate scope of human rights. And there's a theme emerging here, that of the public-private divide. And this public-private divide, you see the hyphen between public and private, that is actually the space that this presentation is about. I'm actually talking about public and private, and using rights as an example of that. Okay, but let me carry on and demonstrate this as opposed to just talking about it. Other things they have done is to expose and condemn the differential impact of violence, pornography, prostitution, sexual harassment, race, cultural practices like sati and female genital mutilation in the ways they disproportionately affect women. Particularly, the radical feminists have done a lot of work in this regard. And the Black feminists have identified relations between gender and race, as opposed to gender on the one hand and race on the other, as well as class, ethnicity, religion, and so on and so forth. But having said that, the liberal formal equality model is the most successful one, and that is the one that has triumphed. To reiterate what I said before, to repeat myself, we are yet to learn the lessons of second and third generation feminisms in terms of reforming our legal and political institutions, leave alone our social and cultural ones. Okay. So I almost feel like apologizing for running you through very quickly these complex, complicated thoughts over time, but we need to be practical and see how we're going to use these theories. And the reason why I'm putting them there is to enable us to think our own thoughts for ourselves in an informed way that is sensitive to our needs, our experience, our history, and our aspirations. We need to be free, even as we are informed by all of these ideas. So, how? So I talked about the what, the why. Now it's time for how are women to be economically empowered? So in this context of developing feminist research methods to achieve that general outcome, to get women into jobs and to get women into business. How are we going to do this? Starting with the labor of thinking. So we have the ideas and we need to use these ideas practically. So I've talked about women, I've talked about empowerment, and I'm going to talk about the economy or economically. So in fact, for this part of the talk, basically is essentially about the meaning of one word and how its meaning changing over time and why that matters. So it matters because you're talking about the public-private divide and how this divide disproportionately affects women in a negative way, because it's an institutionalization of a patriarchal framework which will always subordinate women. Okay. Now, so when you navigate this public-private divide, you will find very, very quickly that each is dependent on the other, and each, when it's divided in that binary, I think that there's somebody washing their dishes or having some tea in the background.
Hello, Dr. Kitiabi, could you mute your mic? Dr. Kitiabi. Okay.
Yes, all right, thank you. You find that this divide divides into, on the one hand, you might say politics on the public side, and family on the private side. And of course, when I say politics, that's from polis, the Greek word for the city, and the Greek word for the home, the private side, is the oikos. So from the polis, we get our politics. From oikos, we get oikonomia, economy. So originally, the term economy designated the private sphere. And now it designates the market. Okay? Which is a very interesting series of developments indeed. And I see that there's some questions on the chat. Let me see if I can address any of them.
Dr. Bikundo, they are not questions, it's a discussion. So don't be distracted. Yeah.
Okay. All right, fine.
Yeah.
Fair enough.
While I have the mic, I was going to ask whether Eric can make Njeri a co-host so that Njeri is able to mute the offending mics.
Okay.
Yes, Professor.
So the public-private divide is what has to be navigated for women to be economically empowered. Long story short, that's what has to be navigated. And we need to understand this up and down, left and right, inside out, in order to do this. And Karen Harvey has done a very interesting historical study called The Little Republic, Masculinity and Domestic Authority in 18th Century Britain. So she's a historian. She's talking about a very specific period, a very specific location, a very specific topic. But it's an excellent starting point, and her book is in the public domain. I've put a citation there, you can be able to get it. She says that a language of public and private, juxtaposing the house, so the private, against the outside worlds of work and politics, was a profoundly important and deeply gendered one in early modern England. And as England went, so do we go, because of our legacy of course, the common law and parliamentary constitutionalism and so on and so forth. So these same aspects apply, mutatis mutandis, as my lawyer friends would say. They apply in the same way, in the same place when it comes to Kenya. So this public and private is gendered. It's gendered. It's very gendered, and it's gendered in ways that are profound, in ways that are present even now. We don't even think about them, or we assume that they're natural, when actually it takes a lot of work to keep them like that. It takes a lot of work to keep them like that. So if I can summarize the point I'm trying to make, we talk about economic empowerment. So we're talking about the economy. So I said what women's economic empowerment is. I said why we speak about women. I say why we need to talk about empowerment. And now I'm talking about the economy. And I'm saying the economy, was the economy and is from oikonomia. Okay? And as such, it's part of the divide between the polis and the oikos, the public and the private. Okay, this divide is fundamental. It's fundamental to all our laws, to all of our politics. And if there's going to be any empowering, we need to think through how this divide operates in ways that are inimical to the interests of women. Okay? And one way, when I talk about economic empowerment, if we narrow down to economic empowerment, is the distinction between paid and unpaid labor versus valued and unvalued labor. This is why it matters. So both the public side and the private side have labor. But labor is only valued on the public side. So in other words, the value attached to labor is a political decision. And even if we distinguish between public and private, this distinction is a public distinction. It's not a private distinction. It's a distinction that is made on the political side, not in the family side. Even if the idea is this. So if you look at the West and the origin of their ideas, they always talk about the Greek civilization and then the Romans subsequent to that. But if we start with the Greeks and we start with Aristotle's politics. So in politics, which is clearly about politics, Aristotle says that, of course, the polis, the city, is the realm of direct participation in governance, in politics. And of course, only adult males of property could participate in governance in ancient Greece. Whereas the home was the location, was the location of women, children, and slaves who could not, as it were, participate in the polis. They were barred from participating in the polis, not because they could not participate in it, but simply because they were not allowed to. Okay, so, but if I can go back as well as forward and go back to what we talked about, liberal feminism, you can see, so liberal feminism argues for women to be included in the polis. And human rights, generally, when you look at the Convention on the Rights of the Child, the Convention on the Elimination or rather the anti-slavery conventions, and the Convention on Elimination of Discrimination Against Women, you see all of those are talking about these categories that Aristotle said remain in the oikos. They're included in the polis. So you have different legal, you have one that says these are universal rights, everybody has them. Then women come and say, if they're universal, how come we are not enjoying them? So women are given a specific convention. So once that happens, and we assume our work is done, you ask, but what about slaves? Or you say slaves, enslavement is now illegal. What about children? Or yes, then children also have rights. So in theory, everybody can leave the oikos and participate in the polis. But of course, we need to remember that in terms of material lived reality, when this Greek head of the household, the oikonomos or despotes, even when they participate in the city, they can only participate there because somebody is cooking their food, washing their clothes, and looking after their house. So in other words, you cannot have the city without the homestead. You cannot have it. So because it is necessary for the homestead to exist in order for the city to work. But here's where the problem is. This is where the big problem is, because the realm of the household is coded as necessity. It's not. There isn't any autonomy within it. You are not autonomous from needing food, clothing, and shelter. You need it. But the realm of the polis is the realm of autonomy. You're here because you're independent, because you can think for yourself, because you're a man. So autonomy and participation in politics is what is valorized and valued. And therefore you say, so if I'm going to work I am a man, I'm working for you as a man, you need to pay me. Because I'm independent, I can sell my labor to you. So in that way, you can see things which are necessary are coded as having zero value, and things which are based on autonomy, on power, etc., are what actually are coded as being valuable. And remember, that space is what does the actual coding. So there's the coding of paid and unpaid. This is that, and this is the other. But then there's also the activity that decides what is paid and what is unpaid. Okay. And the other key sort of junction for the development of this idea of the economy is actually from Christian theology, which was adapted by the early economists. Adam Smith, for instance, in talking about the invisible hand of the market, was talking about the invisible hand of God in the context of providence. How come the birds of the air don't worry about their clothing, yet God gives them feathers? So of course God would look after us better because he loves us better than birds. So in other words, God works in mysterious ways that will serve our purposes. But when you look at the debate, if you look at what is in the Bible versus what the church fathers says, and this is a debate for another time, really, I'm only putting it here for reasons of completion. Initially, people talked about how God works, and the how being the economy, what he utilizes, and how he brings it about as an economy of the mystery. So the mystery is how God takes care of everyone without intervening using miracles. Okay, and that was later turned into God himself is so first it's God is mysterious, but he works in this clear way, and that was turned to actually how God works is mysterious in itself. So I know the word demystification is overused by we academics, but in the context of the economy, demystification is literally very important and key to this. Okay, but again, I'm just putting it there for reasons of thoroughness as opposed to expounding, completely. These are, as I said, big ideas, but we have to apply them in clear and specific ways. So carrying on the theme of this public-private divide and why it matters, you can see that the economy is something that is original in the private side, but it kind of, in a way, expands to be not just controlling the household, but to what we call the market. So participation in business, as well as participation in paid employment. And if I can go back to Karen Harvey's work, you can see that she says, through economical practices that straddle the house and the world outside, and in rooting personal identity in the house and family, individual men accessed authority both within and without the house. So the private realm is actually the basis for power in the public realm. It's what actually makes it possible. And even when this masculinity was being developed, because of course it's not biological, these are social cultural developments. When this specific masculinity was being developed, you can look, and Karen does this, when you look at kitchens in terms of how they were portrayed, say from the 16th century to the 19th century, initially they were not feminized places at all. Men used to be in the kitchen preparing food, cooking, and so on and so forth. It was a very big sort of social event across different social classes. But gradually, it became seen as a sort of feminine and feminized place, as men were kind of developing what we now consider to be the public realm. So when the man is in the household, it's considered manly. So in fact, the word husband husband is not just a noun, right? It's not just a title or a name we give to someone. Husband is also a verb. It's doing something. It's doing something. So like in saying the phrase animal husbandry, you can see, oh, hang on, what does that mean? You're not talking about somebody's, you're talking about a wife and a husband. You're talking about a certain skill set about utilizing limited resources for clearly defined and specific ends. That is what good husbandry is. You have a limited budget, you have these mouths to feed. How are you going to use your budget to feed these mouths is such a kind of like a manly sort of pursuit, even if it's confined to the private sphere. And using that skill, which is actually what, in fact, to husband is in many ways synonymous with economy. You know, they in this context, they actually overlap in meaning. So if the skills of somebody who keeps their household well are the same skills that are transferable to running a city, to becoming a ruler, to becoming the sovereign. Because the sovereign is like the big father that looks after all of us that are his family. Yeah. So, but when women are doing it, it's given no value at all. No, it's not paid. Neither is it valorized as leadership. So even when it's directly from the oikos, it specifically benefits. It's specifically designed to benefit mostly men. And Karen points out that this authority is not coterminous with masculinity. There's nothing really masculine about husbandry, even if it's embedded into our language as such, but it is gendered, and it foregrounds many culturally wanted manly values. Okay, so this is a historian's perspective on this, and she's spot on, even if she's talking about a very specific period and a very, very specific time. And before, when I was talking about the Bible and this idea of how you move from the economy of the mystery to the mystery of the economy. So I'm putting my sources there for you. So Giorgio Agamben is a leading Italian legal and political philosopher, fairly controversial, but yes, he's done a lot of good work in this. So this is just for those that want to go deeper and further into that. That's where it is. Okay, so basically you can see that the point I'm making is that oikonomia, from which we get economy or economics, its literal meaning is the administration of the house. Okay, and so in Aristotle, this is Agamben making the point that Aristotle distinguishes between the techniques that are required for the economy as from the techniques which are required from politics, as being just how the house, the oikia, differs from the city or the polis. Okay, so, and he talks about that in politics as well, talk about the politician, the king, who belong to the sphere of the polis, and are opposed to the economos and despotes, who are in the sphere of the house and of the family. Okay, so that's an etymological sort of quick and dirty run through economy. You know, the various meanings and valences of economy, how it has changed over time, where it is located, and how we need to navigate this in order to economically empower women. So how do we do this? And I think there'll be time for discussion. These are just sort of suggested points of departure. When you look at how do we incorporate those theoretical frameworks that we've just run through into specific methodologies that will empower women in the context of Africa, specific, Kenya, and I think we also have some of our neighbors in the audience, Uganda and Tanzania. So how do we incorporate and adapt our work to develop analytic frameworks for feminist appraisals of policies and outcomes that most fully incorporate the various feminist perspectives and insights. This is a massive challenge for us, a mountain to climb, but hopefully it will be rewarding, empowering, effective, and will make a difference to the lives of women. And along with this, we need to think about the complementary role different approaches can do to this. Both qualitative and quantitative methodologies would be especially useful to address women's lived experiences as opposed to theoretical abstraction. Okay, thank you very much, and apologies for rushing through so much so quickly.
Thank you very much, Dr. Bikondo. I don't know whether we can clap for him, and because it is an excellent presentation with a lot of insights and food for thought for most of us working in the area. Can we give him a clap?
Yes.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much.
So thank you very much. I think we are now open for discussion, and there's been some discussion on the chat, but if you could raise your hand, I can give you, we can coordinate and have you raise your questions, you know. And I see Rachel Carroll has raised her hand. Please go ahead, Rachel. Rachel, are you there?
Sorry, Njeri, I'm here. Sorry. I have not raised my hand. I don't know what's happening. Sorry.
Okay. Professor Mbote, and then Dr. Meroka.
Thank you very much. And thank you very much, Dr. Bikondo, for a very refreshing presentation. I think you challenge us a lot about the way in which we take feminist theories, hook, line, and sinker, without thinking about how they apply to our specific space. And I really like the public-private. I mean, that for me as a scholar has really informed a lot of the work that I have done. But I wanted to ask a question. Dr. Meroka and I still teach a course. It has now been called Gender and Law, but we have now decided and argued for it to go back to what it was when you taught it with me, which was Women in the Legal Process. And we see a fourth generation of feminism, which I'm sure Dr. Meroka will talk a little too. Where do you place this Me Too movement? You know, my dress, my choice. Where is that in the whole feminism waves? You know, you talk about the three waves, but what about what we are now seeing? Where does that go? I'd just like to hear you speak a little about that.
Me too. So you've decided to ask the simple question first. I'm being ironic. No, that's
Dr. Bikondo,
yes.
Can we allow Dr. Meroka to go, and then you can answer both of them together?
Okay. All right.
Okay. Dr. Meroka.
Thank you, Njeri, and thank you also, Professor Mbote. Actually, my question is related to yours. And Dr. Bikondo, it's always really refreshing to listen to you. Thank you so much for that very wonderful and insightful presentation. You know, at 8 a.m., listening to that, it fires your day. So thank you for that. Yes, my question is related to Professor Mbote's, and I just wanted to ask, in what way are these different theories of feminism related to each other? How do they speak to each other? How do they critique each other? And particularly the African feminisms and their critique to mainstream feminism, but also, you know, I find a challenge sometimes with the African feminism. Do we has mainstream feminism in any way contributed to the African feminisms that we have? Is it useful, or is it or do we say mainstream feminism, we are done with you as African women and we want to forge our way forward? Do we strike a balance? Still see any relevance of mainstream feminism in the African context today? But then I also want to ask the way in which feminism has evolved, as Professor Mbote asked, with, for instance, my choice, my body, my business. Does feminism come down to choice? What is good for me? Because when I look at the earlier strands of feminism, it seemed like they were trying to build a sisterhood. And now if you look at what is happening, for instance, we look at, I'm sorry to be mentioning her here in an academic discussion, but if you look at somebody like Kim Kardashian, and people say she's a feminist, she's doing great, she's made all this money, she's economically empowered, but how did she make the money? Carrying herself up as a sexual object, and making money out of that, and saying to other women and young girls that this is the way to go, this is how you can be economically empowered. Is that truly feminism? And therefore, does feminism come down to it's my choice, or is there something bigger to it, that we care about the next woman, and there are certain values that guide us, that sexual objectification, even if it leads to you making money and being economically empowered, is not a desirable thing. So there are values that we have to live up to. So yeah, that's my question. I know it has been long and winded, but those are concerns for me, which I see even young women, when we teach the gender and the law class, they keep on asking those questions. It keeps on coming up over and over again. Thank you.
All right, so shall I take those two first? Yeah.
Yes, please go ahead.
All right. Again, both really excellent questions, searching and probing questions, and I'll do my best to answer them. I'm not sure I'll be able to do full justice to them. Let me start really out of habit by insisting that the generations of feminisms are mostly temporal locations of movements. So movements in time, mostly, that coincide with thematic choices. But first of all, they emerge over time. So the first one is liberal feminism. Then there are various reactions to liberal feminisms, and then reactions to the reactions, and then reactions to the reactions. So the generations don't have a lot of thematic coherence, because they just developed organically, as political struggles were fought, won, lost, and came to stalemate. Or to put it another way, if we still use this idea of 3 generations as the analytical framework, and then approach the Me Too movement, both in its origins and its receptions, there's something really interesting. So the Me Too movement, of course, was started by a Black woman. A Black woman started the Me Too movement as kind of a protest against, if you like, violence, sexual violence against women. And she said Me Too to point out certain things about the realities of violence that is visited on women's bodies. In that she was not asking for it. She was not in a sense, conventionally attractive. But she too was victimized by this. So she started this. It was a movement. People recognized her in the Black feminist sort of circles, but it didn't really go mainstream until much later on, when Hollywood sort of took it up and ran with it. So the Me Too movement, as it was received, is quite different from the way it was proffered. And you can see the way I'm telling that story. You can see I'm telling this story in an intersectional way. I'm talking about how the experiences of Black women, once mainstreamed, make those Black women's experiences invisible. Okay? So Me Too, at its origins, was Black feminist. And then it was taken up by radical feminists because of the way it talks about violence against women. You see, so it fits that theme. Okay, but then it was also taken up by liberal feminists in the sense that now you're talking about Me Too. So you're saying I too am not conventionally attractive was attacked. I too, that was dressed very conservatively, was attacked. But then the liberals say, but even if I was wearing a miniskirt, even if I was topless, I am still not asking for it. So, or to put it another way, Me Too has a Black feminist wing, it has a liberal wing, it has a radical wing. There isn't a monolithic Me Too movement, in my view, in my estimation. It has different wings. There's there's Me Too original, Me Too Asili, Me Too Kenya, and so on and so forth. So I'd say those original categories sort of stand, but I've not done justice to your point about the fourth generation. I would say these young girls, our daughters and so on and so forth, are going to show us things like we've never seen. This is my suspicion, and I don't, they are really quite different. But in many ways, they are still expressing thoughts and ideas that are not really new. So my dress, my choice. These debates were being had in the 70s, around banning the bra and so on and so forth. These are not new ideas. These ideas have been around. They are being rediscovered by the youth, but the ideas have been around. And to use the Kim Kardashian example, Kim Kardashian, in my view, is a classic liberal feminist. She's basically a first generation feminist, using ideas of participation in the market as standing in for liberation and emancipation. This would be my argument, that Kim Kardashian is a classic liberal feminist individual. She's even studying law, I think, and goes to speak to politicians to get people freed from prison and so on and so forth. So in my view, she fits very neatly within liberal feminism in a way that shows the benefits of that, but also shows the grounds to the critique. And I think my response to that is sort of started to as well as try to respond to Dr. Meroka's question, which is how do these schools of feminism speak to each other? What about the sisterhood? Do we need a united fight against the patriarchy and that sort of thing? I suppose that's the direction you're going. So I think these different schools of feminism build on each other, listen to each other, challenge each other, and are united in their resistance to patriarchal domination. So the unity is there in the experience, but there's variety in the contexts, in the emphasis, and in the concerns. Really, they are all at variance. And I've taken care to indicate the contexts within which these theories arose, the material context where these ideas come from. That's always very, very important. The same way, I'm sorry to keep using legal examples, the same way when you're teaching case law, if you know the facts of the case, you'll be much better able to apply the rule that was created in that case. Once you understand the facts, it gives you the freedom to apply or not apply the rule. But if you only know the rule, you can only apply the rule. You don't have any freedom as to any kind of nuance or what have you. So it's always important to understand the material conditions from which ideas arose for you to have independence of thought. Okay, so these ideas speak to each other. They develop along certain trajectories. They are talking about the actual lived experiences of these women, which what they have in common is of course oppression by the patriarchy, but it's in different ways, in different contexts, and to a different extent. Some are talking about domestic violence, some it's sexual violence, some it's being barred from participating in the market, some it's the glass ceiling preventing them from being promoted, and so on and so forth. All of those are legitimate struggles. They are legitimate struggles that need to be addressed. So I'm not sure if that is a well-meaning sort of response to a good faith response to the questions without being able to really resolve them.
Thank you very much. Professor Kabera has a question. There are questions. Njoka, would you like to ask your question as well? But let's start with Professor Kabera.
Thank you very much, Jerry. And thank you very much, Dr. Bikudo. I think it is always very refreshing to listen to you. I also want to say that I'm very happy to see many of our colleagues from KU. I can see Catherine Dungo, Wajama, and others who are also involved in a program similar to ours on women's economic empowerment. So I think this is a very good opportunity for this conversation. Having said that, maybe I would like you to push a little bit further. First of all, I like what you have just said, where ideas come from, matters. And I wanted you to say a little bit more about, about these classical thinkers and the idea of domestic versus, domestic versus, unpaid, kind of philosophical thinking that leads to unpaid labor, valued and unvalued labor, which is living with us even today, and which I think in both we and in many other areas in this country, that struggle is going on. How do we do women's work? When do women stop being domestic workers? Because even those who have the money pay for it to be done by somebody else, so they can go to the to the public. I think that is an area that we need probably to push a little bit more, because the economic policies, and I think maybe this is why, I don't know whether Dr. Bidi or even Mwabu or even Professor Keretu from the School of Economics, to reflect on why public economic policies have refused to respond to these issues. Is this related to where ideas come from? We are followers of classical thinkers, in the various disciplines, whether it is public, whether it is economics, or whether it's political thought, or whether it is sociological thinking. So that we have not broken out of this traditional thinking, and we continue influencing the society today and devaluing the women's work. I also like something you said, so that I would like us to push that one a little bit further. You said mainstreaming of Black ideas disappear.
Sorry, I missed that. Please say that again.
So you talked about how mainstreaming Black women's ideas also, kind of makes them disappear. And I wanted to, to say something about this, because this is the experience we have had with the gender studies. Is that gender studies or gender and development thinking has been mainstreamed, and having been mainstreamed, women's thinking or feminist thinking continues to disappear in the process, because the institutions themselves, they begin now fighting. Why are they always talking about women? The problem is gender. So it has been mainstreamed and therefore appropriated. By
yes.
Appropriated, and therefore we lose the original thinking, feminist thought, which actually started, Caroline Mozart, who started looking at societies, breaking it into, looking at the systems and breaking them up, and then looking at where are women, because they are the ones, who are disadvantaged, what are the challenges and so on. And then gender and development came in, and it became mainstream, thereby killing the original thinking. That's why, I was thinking that it would be important for us to push a little bit more, and also think about political, economic thinking, and where it is coming. So I have those where ideas come from. How did this lead to unpaid and paid labor? How is this perpetuated by our public economic policies? And then how to ensure that mainstreaming of feminism will now not appropriate the feminist thought and the women from the beginning. Yeah. Okay. Thank you. Thank you.
That's excellent. That's really, really good. So much to take from that. Let me try and participate in the discussion as well. First, let me say this: the distinction public-private, from which the distinction paid and unpaid, or valued and unvalued labor comes from. First of all, it's not a principled decision. It's not based on principle. It's a power play. It's a power play. It's a power play. It's not based on any principle. Why do I say this? When men wash dishes, they are paid. When men cook, they are paid. You know what I mean? They are actually paid. You can earn a living as a dishwasher as long as you're not doing your own dishes at home. You can earn a living as a chef as long as you're not cooking your own meal at home. So there's nothing in the form of labor that determines as to whether it's paid or unpaid, except its location, whether it's in the public space or the private space. Okay? So it's not a principled sort of distinction, not at all. It's a power play, because we are so used to seeing it, we act as if it is natural. And let me tell you, even the distinction between nature and not nature, or between nature and humans, is also mapped onto the public-private distinction. So anything that we think is natural based on necessity is coded oikos, is coded private. Anything that we think as human, as what makes us human, whether it's that we can think, or whether that, going to Aristotle, that a human being is a political animal. That definition of a human being is, you can see how much is there. So if you participate in politics, that is what makes you a human. If you don't, you remain an animal. And remember, most of humanity, women, children, and slaves, are not participating in politics. So they are coded as being like animals in that sense, having less status, having less capacity. In fact, literally not being fully human. You know, that's what that distinction means. Man is a political animal. The police and the oikos are separate. Only men can operate in the police. But materially speaking, for a man to operate in the police, for you to have time to go and talk politics with your fellow men, somebody else has to be feeding you, clothing you, looking after your children, and so on and so forth. So in other words, the participation in politics is highly, highly artificial and absolutely dependent on what happens in the oikos. In other words, for the men to participate in the polis, they need to leave their humanity behind. And then they say, us in the polis are the ones who are fully human. You know what I mean? That makes no sense at all when I put it like that. But those are the basic assumptions that are built into our law and our politics, because we too got these ideas, you know, via the British, you know, from Greece. Now, how come then? And I'm not really departing from this point, but I'm linking it to your next question. How come then we find that when women's struggles are mainstreamed, women disappear, and we don't see them anymore? The answer to that is that it's because for them to be mainstreamed, they need to fit within a liberal feminist paradigm in which the law is blind, it says, to sex and to gender. So it's blind. So in other words, a legal person is genderless. That may well be so, but of course the radical feminists will tell you it's not really genderless. They're coded as masculine. Their gender is masculine. So they say genderless, but as a matter of fact, it means masculine, because remember, this participation in the polis was designed for and limited to men of property that were free. That is what we call legal personality. Legal personality is a very gendered, completely gendered idea, and especially so when that is not pointed out. When you don't point out, actually, when you read the law saying everyone is a masculine figure. It's not neutral. It's not gender neutral. Even when the law says he is gender neutral, and so is she. Yes, you can write that down, but as a matter of fact, it's completely gendered. It means he. It means he, because that is how it was designed. Even if you change the name now, it doesn't change its fundamental features. Yeah. Yeah.
Thank you. Grace had a question. Go ahead, please.
Okay, thank you so much for giving me this chance. I want to appreciate Edwin for the insightful presentation. You have really given us a very, very heavy breakfast in terms of thinking. And thank you, Professor Kabila, for looping in the Kenyatta University team. You can see we are so many. I think it's not a question that I have, it's just a comment and a follow-up from what you have said about domestic labor and public and private work. And I'm thinking now, looking at it from a Western and an African point of view, where Western domestic labor or Western private work, I see these women who are working in a household with all the gadgets to use labor for them, and that is still domestic private work. And then I come to Africa and start to see the woman in Africa who is doing private domestic labor, which is unpaid, but it is defined in terms of, I see this rural woman in Africa who is taking care of domestic animals which are producing money and all this, and I see this woman who is taking care of children, who is actually doing so much of productive work which is actually earning an income. So looking at all the feminist approaches and all that, where do we leave the African women for in this current age and in this context? I am talking about the rural women, not the urbanized women like us, who may also be living in the like a Western lifestyle. We have so much, you know, that eases our labor. We have house helps, we have live-ins, we have a lot of machinery that eases our labor. Vis-a-vis this, my sisters in the rural areas who are also in unpaid work, yet this unpaid work is the one that is supporting their families. It is unpaid, all right, but it is, and it's productive work, and it's seen as non-productive work. Yet, where do you think would be our point of departure when we talk about women's economic empowerment? Thank you so much.
Thank you for your question, and let me beg your indulgence. I need to take a quick break, and I'll be back. Okay, I'll be back. Give me 5 minutes.
Okay.
Okay. Are we all taking that break? Should we all not take that break?
Okay, let's take the break and come back.
Yes. And
Yes,
use
2 hours
commercial.
is a long time. So,
After taking tea porridge and I don't know what else.
okay, 5 minutes for everyone then.
Yeah, sure. Thanks.
Yeah, Dr. Bikundu,
Yes.
you can
Yes.
take one more question before you respond to Grace. There's Leah on the
Okay.
line who'd like to ask a
All right.
question.
Okay. Okay. Go ahead, Leah.
Maybe she's still taking the break. We agreed that everybody takes a 5 minutes after you left.
Oh, that's good. Excellent. Yes, everybody should take a break. I can take another one as you wait for
Philip
Leah.
Wambua. I see Philip. And who else?
Can I add another one, Dr. Bikudo?
Yes, please, Prof.
Okay.
Okay, I was just thinking about whether you can say a little bit more about the economy women and the economy according to John Stuart Mill. Just a little bit. I'm trying to you know, to get us to because I know there are many economists here to say, yeah, to give us some, you know, opportunity to read it. And then,
so you think I'm making economists my punching bag?
no. This, no, you're not actually. I think we need some kind of a breakthrough in terms of connecting economic thinking and feminist thinking.
Okay.
Yeah, just
all right. So male, the economy. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, just a little bit. But it's very good. I'm really very, very happy about beginning this conversation.
Look, I'm very grateful for the opportunity. I find it very, very meaningful and extraordinary to be able to participate in this. Really.
Yeah. Oh, thank you.
Yeah. Is Leah back?
I am.
Please go ahead.
I also want to echo Professor Kabira's issues on gender and development, and particularly on the issue of that gender has been mainstreamed in our universities and institutions. But also want to combine that with Professor Wamue's reaction about the rural and the urban woman and the house realm. A little bit like taken aback of the last 6 months and what I hear women in the urban area is talking about. That as soon as this whole scenario of coronavirus, and most of women in the urban areas felt to be safe, let's say our house helps away so that the family, we can coalesce and sort of like work as a team because of all the gains we assumed we have gotten, that we can bring Akina Edwin into the kitchen. And Edwin, allow me to use you as an example.
I have so many buns. Thank
God you did. And all of us can. However, the talk I'm hearing is like, have we gained anything since the time we started talking about sharing the responsibilities in the private realm? What I'm hearing is women are complained they have been left totally on their own while people are seated at the sitting room, and when they are like working and cooking, and you tell somebody, come and check on this as I'm taking a call from my work, somebody says, you have to decide, is it work or our family? So I'm totally confused, and many women are. And I'm wondering whether we are better off than the rural woman, but I'm also wondering, is money equal to empowerment? And let me stop it there. Thank you.
Thank you for that, Leah.
Dr.
So
Bikundo,
can I begin to,
because we don't have much time left, I would like Philip and Elishiba to ask their questions, then you can respond to all of them. Philip Wambua.
Yes, good morning, everybody. Thank you so much for that insightful talk, Dr. Edwin Bikundo. We started with you and we are still with you. And I want to approach this from the socio-economic and political perspective, where seemingly it's like in the African context, there's been that thought that women are discriminated either economically and also they are meted violence on. And this always comes from men. And I also generally in big numbers, maybe can be generalized. But we also have isolated cases where we have had women discriminate and also omit violence to either of the gender. A case is reported of that house girl in Uganda who was left with a small baby, and you saw what happened. And therefore, now having said all this, my thought and my thinking is being driven by the fact that there's been this construct and this concept that women are their own enemies. And therefore, looking at the approaches you have taken us through, I'm thinking loudly that it's about time that this construct was a little bit interrogated, because even looking across the world, you're going to find that in terms of voting, women are the majority. And like if I was to give an example of a class I'm handling now at master's level, I have 6 students and all of them are females. And therefore, that tells us the postmodern kind of thinking is the fact that that woman has seen the reality of the matter, that they have what it takes. And I like somebody who has posted something in the chat, and they're saying that it's about time that women went to the dining table carrying the arsenals, because they have the numbers, they have the intellect. And therefore, from where I stand, without using any kind of violence and without using any kind of intimidation, it's about time. It's about time those arsenals were unleashed. And that they are not being unleashed to the male gender. They're just being unleashed to the fact that, yes, we have the numbers. And we are always told that, of course, without a woman in any kind of setup, there's no family. There's no family. And therefore, we should start from the down where I talked about husbandry, from home, up to the local, up to the national, up to the international level, where we want to see women participation being visible and coming from them. We should not, at this point in time, civilization, always wait for me as a man to kind of extend an olive to them. They have what it takes. And in terms of the postmodern kind of approach which you alluded to, we are in, it's about time then the woman demystified this thinking of they are their own worst enemies. It's a comment which maybe you can also enrich on, because they have the numbers, they have the intellect, and they have what it takes. But sometimes, and I'm saying this from my own side, it's like if they were given a chance to choose between 2 professionals, one or the other, generally you'll find them going to that man, whom they are sometimes saying is denying them what opportunities. A comment which possibly you can also enrich on. And thank you so much for the presentation. We started with you and we're still with you.
Yes,
Thank you
thank
very
you.
much. Professor Elishiba Kimani.
Thank you very much. I wanted to also to echo with all the others to appreciate the presentation. It is very good. It has given us a lot of food for thought, even re-examining what we know and what we need to know. But I liked the definition that we started with in terms of the women economic empowerment from feminism perspective. And indeed, the presenter said, and we agreed, that it is access to full participation within paid labor and also the commercial market. And while we are looking at the women economic empowerment, I'm very concerned about, we have tried, and many things have happened to really empower women in the past. And I think now we are taking a different perspective, because we have talked about women being given access to credit. We know even in rural Kenya, we have had a lot of work being done for women to join groups and do table banking and so on and so forth. But when we look at the situation of women, it is still wanting, and that is why we are still having discourse on this very important aspect. But my main concern is that, and I am echoing the concern of my colleagues, that there is the issue of the women when they give the unpaid work. We talk about the unpaid work, but I want to call it care work, because in the past we were calling it reproductive roles. But now when we call it the care work, we are thinking about what we can do to women to uplift the women economically. We can do all what we can even give them skills, we can train them, we can give them information. But this unpaid work and the care work that they give, which of course some men give, but the back again stops with women. In this, the two things are very, very outstanding. The issue of coordination of the care work that the women give, and it is not just at the family level, it is also at the community level. The recognition and redistribution of the same. Because this work that they give so much attention to, no matter whether they are still in economic, they still do a lot of care work, the care work rests around them. If it is given recognition and redistribution, two things stand out that really we must examine on how to reorganize the structures and the systems so that this work is not just recognized by the men, it is also recognized by the duty bearers, so that they support the women to be able to do this with ease, very easily, and so that it takes less time. But for this to happen again, we need to address the issues of not just policies, not just legislations, but also the programs that are being put in. But again, for this to happen, we are talking of a lot of work that has already been done, but it also needs to be done in terms of lobbying. We need to lobby a lot, even with the women themselves, to accept to release some of the work so that the distribution can take place. They can release it to the children, they can release it to the men. But as we do this, I see strength relying on pulling together of all the area of the areas, the critical areas of feminism, that is coming in, because there are things we can negotiate, but there are also things that we can demand with a bang. That is radical. But also recognition that not all women are at the same situation, and that's why we are talking about the and the urban. We are also talking about the and the non-elite women, but also we are talking about women very, very special areas, like in Kenya, urban areas, we talk about the slums. So I don't know what you have about this.
Look, those are really good questions. I know we don't have a lot of time left, so I'll try and rush through them for comprehensiveness as opposed to thoroughness. So if I start with Grace's, Professor Moore's question around African women and how African women can be addressed, in the context of feminisms whose ideas principally come from the West, and especially the plight of African women in the village. So let me start by saying this: African women have to think for themselves. That's a non-negotiable bit in all of their variety, from elite, educated, middle class, professional women, all the way to the women in the village whose principal occupation in terms of the time that they spend in a day is getting water for their family. And I think there's an element of learning, because if you talk about African women, the majority of African women, of course, are rural women. So if there's going to be a monolithic African woman, you talk about a village woman. And to serve their purposes, we need to learn from them, not just to help them, but to help all of society. So the methodologies that we use and to make this work include how would you interview them? Where would you get the time? What would be the context? Can you provide any inducements or relief from their labors for them to actually talk to you? And what are the resources that you need to actually capture what these people are saying, including basic linguistic resources, and then transcription, and where necessary translation, as well as just observing them as they go about their day, just being immersed in their lives and watching what they do and how they do it. Just this very rich study deploying all the various rules to really learn from African women, because I mean, I haven't done the research, but from looking and extrapolating, I can see that, you know, the African continent would grind to a halt very quickly if women, you know, did not play their very necessary role keeping everything together. For sure. We know this. We know this in our own experience. You look around and see what is happening, you realize our society basically runs on the energy of women. Funerals, weddings, births, markets, what have you, you know, African women are very key and central. And even the most patriarchal of politicians recognize this when they start talking about, as I've mentioned before, the Wanjiko constitution. Talking about what does this constitution have for Wanjiko. So in other words, identifying by name a typical village woman and putting them at the center of the most important legal and political document that we have, yet without acknowledging their presence. I mean, Wanjiko can tell us herself what her concerns are, and we need to learn from her, as opposed to us telling Wanjiko, you know, Wanjiko, there's somebody who was called Catherine McKinnon, and another who was called Carol Gilligan, and this is what they said about rights. I think it has to be the other way, learning from them, and then using our education, our platforms to advance the agenda of the African woman generally, you know, but using them as the foundation and the basis for that work. Now, Professor Kabira, you asked me the difficult question of talking about John Stuart Mill and the economy. So the thing about Mill, of course, is a liberal thinker. In the party of liberal thinkers, you think of John Locke, and then, you know, John Stuart Mill. Those are the early sort of luminaries. And if I can do a sort of materialist analysis of the ideas and the context of the ideas before going to what you know, liberalism itself, clearly these are middle class men who are basically drawn from the merchant class or are sympathetic to them, and are doing the necessary intellectual labor to make their societies transform from being a feudal monarchy to being a commercial empire. So these ideas occur in that context and are from that class with those specific interests. So when they talk about freedom as an ideal, because that's what, when you say liberal, liber is freedom. Well, not quite freedom, it's liberty, but they sort of say it's freedom, but they mean liberty. And I'll explain the difference in a little while. They talk about freedom in terms of rights, what, you know, they call the rights of man, which is supposed to include women, but also they are actually talking about the freedom of the market. It's the freedom of the market, the freedom to participate in the market, the freedom to participate in international trade, and so on and so forth. So the freedom of liberal thinking is both the market and individual rights, if you like. You know, it's this whole set of related ideas from the perspective of the interests of the merchant classes of a specific time in the United Kingdom, and the ideas that flown from that are that the government should, you know, step back and allow all of these autonomous individuals to participate in the market and create the necessary wealth that will propel the society forward. So you cannot really run the economy through legal regulation. In fact, you should keep the law out of it and let the market decide, let the market sort of work its magic. So liberal ideas and the market go hand in hand. And if anything, they're fundamentally more about the market than about individual autonomy, because the individual autonomy is supposed to enable the market to thrive and succeed. Now, the reason why I was saying this is liberty and not freedom is because because liberty from liber, in Latin, it means somebody that has been freed, not somebody free. It's somebody that has been freed, somebody that has been emancipated. So in other words, the word liber includes within it the notion that they had once been enslaved. So liber, homo liber, a free man, is somebody who has gone through emancipation. So emancipate, to free them. So in other words, these are people that were not born free. They were born in bondage and then are subsequently freed. So you can see that in liberal thinking, there's a big blind spot around freedom, because the liberal individual is founded on the idea of being freed from enslavement. So you think that your freedom is dependent on somebody else being enslaved. So that's why you leave your family, your oikos, you leave the slaves there doing your work while you participate in politics, because it is impossible for you to look after yourself and participate in politics. Somebody else has to do it. This is built into these ideas that we use, and reflectively, without reflecting on it, that we are yet to found any kind of political, legal personality that is based on freedom, truly free human beings that were born free. Instead, it's people that were once enslaved that are now free. So when I talk about people, so women being liberated, children being liberated, and slaves being liberated, that is, you see, that is the freedom of somebody who was once enslaved, not people that were born free. So what I mean, so you talk about, so liberal thinkers like and Mill is a great example. Locke as well. If we can also unpack him, but we really don't have time. It's, in my view, it's based on an illusory idea of freedom. They're talking about liberty, even if they call it freedom. It's an illusion, and this illusion is supposed to be served by the market. The market will provide. So even if I go to work, I'll make money and pay somebody to wash my dishes. You know what I mean? Now, when a pandemic happens, it's a sort of a natural experiment, because then you see what actually happens when necessity comes knocking, which is that the women are the ones who are actually doing that labor, not the men. Yet there's nothing in the labor that has a label that says women only. So of course, part of this is of course between husband and wife to discuss about how they are going to do the chores together. I mean, this is necessity. The dishes will not wash themselves. Food will not be cooked itself. There needs to be a discussion, respectful, mutual, about how to do this. But also, I mean, we need to think about what we can achieve now for ourselves, what will have to be achieved in our daughter's generation, and what will have to be achieved in our granddaughter's generation as well. So in other words, we need to do many different things simultaneously to achieve the same sort of strategic goals of women's emancipation. Okay, and in a sense, I know I've also strayed into Laia's question around the pandemic, because the pandemic, as I said, makes these things very, very clear. But also you can see in the pandemic, there are things which have occurred that nobody expected. One of them is that Africa, of all the continents, has done best. Completely unexpected. This public health sort of crisis has been handled best by the people you'd expect the least from. Okay, we never knew We never knew, I think Africans, we knew, but other people did not know the capacity that Africans have to deal with public health emergencies. Now they more or less know because the numbers don't lie. But the other thing is we can, in the West especially, we can see that Western women leaders have done much better than the males. So much better that it's not even a contest. It's obvious and clear. The numbers are incontrovertible. The women have done a much better job. Why have they done a much better job? Is a live question. I would argue it's because of the fact that they can bring a nurturing quality to their leadership regarding their population. The kind of nurturing quality that is necessary for, as it were, taking care of a population's health. For the people who are, fans of Michel Foucault, you'll see here that where the male politicians are trying to use disciplinary power, the police, curfews, etc., while the women politicians are using biopower, biopolitical interventions around nurturing the health of their population. So it's very different ways of doing this that you can only discover in the context of a pandemic in unexpected ways. So the pandemic is excellent with that point. Now, to turn on the idea that women are their own enemy, of course, this is a myth. This is a myth. Women are not the ones who wrote these laws saying women cannot go to school. Women are not the ones that say, we prefer our sons to have higher education and so on and so forth. This is not true. It's not true. It's basically a myth. Yeah, there's somebody who has their microphone on. But in any event, even when we say women are the majority of voters and they do not necessarily vote for female candidates, I think it's important to understand this. First, the breadth, depth, and quality of women candidates is always less than that of male candidates. It's not as if you have 50% of candidates being male and 50% of candidates being female. The pools do not match up at all. There's fewer women to choose from. That is one. Number two, women's issues are invisible. Issues which are important and essential for women are essentially invisible from political platforms. And women they're not foolish and they want to be led well. So of course, when thinking independently, they would make certain choices that would seem counterintuitive to us. But when you think about it, you'll realize actually it's because we are not talking about people starting from a basis of equality, not in numbers, not in information, not in resources. We need, in other words, if we have 50% women running, 50% men running, no one will be able to say that women are their own worst enemies. It just will not happen. Clearly it won't. At the moment, people can say that because you look at the data and you misread it. You say, oh, but there was a woman candidate that you never voted for. Well, how many women candidates were there versus men? What were the women's issues on the ballot? You need to dig deeper to get clearer insight to sort of dispel this notion. And if I can now turn to Professor Elishaba's question, which, if memory serves, was around, noting the unpaid work that women do. So again, the context of the pandemic sort of indicated that. Yeah, I think first it's important to quantify this. It's important to quantify, to have an evidence base of the nature, extent, and importance of the labor that women do almost exclusively, and that it is unpaid. I think this needs to be documented, cataloged, categorized, and quantified, even in terms of actual shillings. So how much more work do women do when they get home, or when women stay home? How much work they are doing in terms of dollar figures? That if you had to get somebody to come and do that work, what would you pay them? Which is, in a sense, it works almost like a tax on being a woman. So you'll say that women actually start minus who knows, 300 shillings a week compared to men. You already start 300 shillings behind because of the labor that you have to put in that is unpaid. Yeah, I mean, that we need to put a figure on this and put it out there and start debating it in the public sphere, as opposed to leaving it as a domestic kind of conversation of unequals in the home. And these are some of those things we need to consider, even when thinking about new policies that address the fact that women are doing this amount of money, this amount of labor that is not paid, yet it is necessary for the entire society to run. I find it quite paradoxical that necessity is coded at 0. I mean, for the life of me, this is highly, highly illogical. Something which makes everything else possible is completely valueless. What actually produces the value is valueless completely, in a way that is ridiculous. I simply, this is why I say it's sort of unprincipled, and we need to begin to do this. And this also goes to the point around women being their own enemy. In a way, part of this conversation has to be men talking to men about masculinity and masculinities. This has to be part of the conversation. What we think it means to be a man, how it relates to women, and so on and so forth. I think this is a very, very, very important conversation to be had. And in many ways, with the pandemic, there's an invaluable opportunity around this as well. I could say a lot more on that, but I see that we essentially have run over time. Yeah. So I'll thank you for your patience, and we can carry on the conversation later. Yeah.
Thank you very much, Dr. Bikundo. It's been a very enlightening conversation. There's a lot. I'm sorry we can't take those who put up their hands on the chat right now. And there's also been a very rich conversation going on the chat, and we will share the recordings. So at this point, I'll give Professor Kabera the opportunity to give us the closing remarks. My apologies for those who couldn't raise their questions.
Thank you very much. This has been a very enlightening conversation, Dr. Bikundo. So we really are very, very grateful. From the beginning, you said we are actually talking about looking at the broad context and developing feminist research methods and grounded theory for women's economic empowerment. And I think you have given us really a lot of food for thought. I wanted to say that, in terms of women's political participation and issues related to this and, constitution making, academic women, came up with, picked on the critical mass theory and critical mass theory for women's representation. And in a sense, it has guided the thinking of women's representation, not just at the academic level. The idea actually has been sold to women at the grassroots level everywhere, so that, and I'm not saying that the theory is, the theory is over, but it has been it's becoming part of our own academic culture. And I know that people like, the women, female scholars who are here, like Catherine Dungo, Elishiba, and others, Professor, Grace Wamwe, Professor Bote, and others, are familiar with this, with the critical mass theory and how it has influenced the direction women have taken in terms of promoting women's representation. Now, when we come to the women's economic empowerment, we are searching for, and I like what the scholars who have brought in, the rural women, Wajama and others, Elia Wajama and Professor Kimani and others, what we are looking for is to develop that feminist research method and grounded theory that will give us tools that are easy and applicable in our own situation, but also that can be sold to women's organizations, to women leaders, to women at the grassroots level, because economic empowerment is really something you want to see happen at all levels. But the role, we're trying to play the role of the academia, can become this theory that will drive economy, of women, and that will also influence the national and county economies, to actually take the women's issues on board. So they can't compete with that one, with the other person.
Sorry, Prof. Alexander Micheni, please switch off your mic.
Thank you very much. Yeah, so I think we have actually started that journey, and we are going to have more conversation on the same, because the problem with the and I'm sure the economists are here, is trying to to help us as academics, bring the mystery. Did you say the mystery of the economy and the economy?
And the economy of the mystery, yeah.
The mystery, because sometimes academic language, academics speak to themselves and to their discipline, So we would like to find a way, as people working for women's economic empowerment, to decipher that particular language itself, and theory and methodology, so that it can become more human and feminine as well. So basically, we want to move in that direction. And I think for me, and I think for many of the people in the two hubs, it is a route that we must take, and it's one of the biggest contributions we can give, to the studies on women's economic empowerment, but also to building the capacity for social movement that actually change the situation. I think this is the direction we are going. So I think today was a very, very important conversation, and it lays the foundation for our discussion on that route. And hopefully we will now say towards maybe within so many months of conversation that now these are the methodologies we are going to use, feminist methodologies. I will say, let me say among other methodologies, because we are all multidisciplinary, but whichever way, it doesn't matter even whether it is statistics, you can use, feminist methodologies and theory that is actually grounded on our own experiences. So I think, yes, I think it is a very, very powerful beginning point, and beginning of a long journey. And we would like to work with you on this journey. So I want to thank all the participants, and particularly all those from KU and from Nairobi hubs, and the other guests. And I have seen also some of our students, Catherine Muma and others, who have listened to you before. And I think it has been, again, a new conversation, which is very, very, very important. Thank you very much, Dr. Bikudo, and we will communicate and see when we are going to take the conversation further, because you are part of it. By the way,
thank you.
Yeah, Dr. Bikudo is part of our, committee on the panel of experts that will continuously engage with this conversation for a long time. Thank you very much. And Paul for spending more time, but
No, thank you, Prof.
Women are
It's a
worth spending
privilege.
time on. Yes. Women's agenda and women are worth spending our time on. We have spent all our lives.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thanks,
Thank you.
Prof. All right.
Thank you very much. This is the end of the conversation. We'll see you next time.
All right. Thank you, Jerry. See you next time.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Jerry, and
Thank you,
everybody.
Jerry, for facilitating so beautifully. Thank you. Sorry, Professor, continue. Yeah. Okay. Thank you so much, everybody.